everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And today I'm joined by Tom Brogan to talk about his book Scotland 101, An Introduction to the National Team, which is out now, published by Pitch Publishing. Hello, Tom.
Hello, Alistair. Thanks very much for having me on and welcoming me into your home.
It's great to see you in real life, isn't it, rather than through a screen, through the prism of a screen. So tell us about the book. I give us an overview of it because there's a lot to talk about.
So Scotland 101 is the history of the Scottish national football team in 101 relatively short chapters, covering going back to the very first game in 1872 right up until the most recent game that I could fit in before publishing, which was luckily Scotland's 2-0 win over Spain. I sat down to watch that game with my laptop to go, right, I'm going to write about this game, obviously not knowing it was actually going to end up being a famous victory, you know. So I was quite fortunate that I could finish the book with actually a right up to date famous win. So it sort of ends on a kind of triumphant note.
Ending on a high with the Scottish team's quite a rarity.
Yeah, absolutely.
It could have been a 6-0 defeat or something.
And this is what I tried to do with this book. I didn't want to just focus on the sort of 100 great moments or whatever. I wanted to focus on some of the disasters as well. I mean, a lot of disasters is what shapes us all as Scottish football fans, you know. And I would like to say we've learned from the disasters, but I think as it goes on, people didn't learn, or the Scottish FA didn't learn from some of the disasters, some of the bureaucratic disasters, as well as some of the disasters on the pitch and things like the jerseys they took to hot climates and all that kind of stuff. They still repeated these kind of errors, making jerseys double lined and all this to go out to play in 80-degree heat. You know, so I did want to focus on some of the calamities as well.
And it's a mixture between kind of games, moments, people, you know, central people. You've mixed kind of a whole lot of things. Before we go more into that, why did you want to write it?
Well, my first book was called We Made Them Angry, Scotland at the World Cup 1982, which is a linear story of Scotland qualifying for the 1982 World Cup. And what happened out in Spain. So I was looking for some ideas to follow that up, you know. And it was actually as I was looking about and trying to think, I was thinking of doing something again about Scotland. I didn't want to do the 86 World Cup because it wasn't that exciting. Again, it was disappointing. So I was thinking, what else could I focus on? And one of the sort of books, as I looked about the bookshop, one of the books I kind of focused on was Vicky Riley's book, The Beatles 101. And when I bought that, I kind of thought I could kind of do something like this, only with Scottish football. Because again, she doesn't just focus on 101 songs and anything. There's different things about the Beatles that she focuses on in that book. I thought you could kind of apply that to the Scottish national team, and that was where the kind of spark for that particular structure of this book struck me, you know. And as I say in the introduction to the book, my dad told me a lot of these stories, the 9-3 debacle and all that. My dad would tell me about, I don't think he was actually at the game, he watched it in the telly kind of thing, you know, and he would tell me about Jimmy Johnson and all that kind of stuff, you know. So he told me a lot about Scotland wins and defeats and all that over the years. 77 game, he insisted that my cousin was on the crossbar, you know what I mean? So it was, again, it's something I focus on. The English say that was despicable and all Scots are ashamed of that, but Scottish people aren't ashamed of that. The Wembley pitch invasion of 77 at all. People who were there still absolutely revel in it. But anyway, that was the sort of the idea for the book. And then when I got that, I was like, well, the 101. And there was a point when I thought I've made my bed here with 101 chapters, you know, because there was a point where I was going 80. I think I could 80, and then I don't need 80, but I need to stretch it out and then edit it again. So I'd made the idea it was 101, so it'd have to be 101 chapters, and I think I got there hopefully enough with 101 interesting events in Scottish national team's football history.
And I guess having games, you can did you almost think, well, there's always kind of interesting games, even if they've been, you know, big defeats or anything like that you can put in to make it up to that one. I guess the actual games themselves allow a flexibility there.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there was a lot of games that just were obvious ones. and there's other ones I wanted to dig into to write things that maybe aren't focused on as much. But also I pulled out players as well and wanted to focus on maybe some of the players that aren't often highlighted, you know, maybe guys like Bobby Collins that you don't hear so much about, or maybe fans. I mean, you think of people who, you know what I mean, are in their 30s just now, you know what I mean, kind of even guys like Joe Jordan or whatever, they maybe wouldn't know about, you know. So you think there's a wealth of Scottish players there as well you can focus on that maybe people don't read so much about these days as well. So but I also wanted to dig into different wee aspects. I wanted to look at other things that weren't exactly related to the Scottish football team, but were inherent to Scottish football fans following of the team, like Arthur Montfort, like Hugh McIlvenney's writing, and like Only a Game and Only an Excuse, things like that, and the songs Flower of Scotland, Scotland the Brave. I wanted to look at that as well, you know, because it's all a part of being a Scotland supporter, you know, all these things.
It kind of reminds you that Scottish football kind of permeates Scottish society way beyond the football itself.
Yeah.
As you say, people have watched Only an Excuse or had their thoughts about the national anthem or all of these things, whether they could go to games or even care about them at all, you know, they'll have those things. How did you approach writing it then? Because I looked at the bibliography and it's quite a substantial bibliography.
Yeah.
Lots of books, but there's also websites, YouTube clips, podcasts, all sorts of things. Did you just have to sift through those?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I thought like now has to be the sort of greatest time ever to write sort of narrative non-fiction, because you've got so much that's actually at your fingertips, as well as having resources like the National Library and the Mitchell Library and the British Library in London. You know, there's so much you can do just sitting at your computer with an internet connection. So many people have made Scottish football history in particular alive. That's why in the acknowledgements I credit some of these guys who scan in their programmes and put them on Flickr for you. That was one of the first things that I did. I went to Flickr to the guy Miles McLagan's account where he scanned like thousands of football programmes, and I looked at the Scotland ones and I just downloaded them all as PDF files or JPEGs, and there you've got suddenly I've got a wee archive there of football programmes that you can start pulling bits of information from. So there's so much online. So there's games on YouTube. You can buy DVDs of games that aren't on YouTube from different sites. Podcasts. Obviously, there's so many interviews with people. So many newspapers that you can get online. There's things that are freely available, like the Evening Times, the Glasgow Herald, through the Google News archive. But there's other subscriptions you can get, you know. So and there's so many books that you can find online, as well as you can buy cheaply off like books or whatever, you know. So yeah, once I get my games together, then you start looking at what, you know, players' autobiographies. He played in this game, played in that game. You need to look at his autobiography for this. And you look at the big books like Scotland the Team by Andrew Ward. The London Hearts website is great because they've got just a database of Scotland players and games. So start pulling information like that, dates, teams, and then once you've got that, then I'm starting to look at what more information you get. The easiest way to start is going and get a match report, and you start to just sort of type up who scored the goal at this time kind of thing and who passed the ball, and then you start stretching out. You'll find something, that's quite a wee interesting detail, and you go and chase that down, and then like I say, you go and look at Billy McNeil's autobiography or Ken Douglas's autobiography, and you get wee bits and pieces, and that'll lead you to this and that'll lead you to that. The danger is that you are, let's say, absolutely bogged down in research, and you do sit reading. It must be fairly overwhelming to face all that. It can be. I think it was maybe about 10 months or something. It took me to write it. But yeah, I mean, obviously there's you've got a word count, and eventually you need to be kind of brutal with just expunging stuff and getting rid of, you know, excess, you know, words, you know. But yeah, you can get quite into it and track down details. As you're doing it, you know, I'm not going to use this, but this is quite interesting for me to go and find this out, kind of thing, you know. Like when Scotland go to Anfield, when the Scotland-Wales game is sent to Anfield 1977, there was the people of Anfield and Liverpool weren't happy about it because, first they were talking about taking it to Birmingham at Villa Park, but Rangers and Aston Villa fans had battled at a friendly, so the residents of Birmingham weren't happy about that. So you start writing about that while going, I'm going to cut this out because this is just too much information. And then Celtic played Liverpool in 1966, and there was, pubs were. There was a guy saying that his pub, Celtic fans threw tomatoes at pictures of the Queen he had up at his pub. So you started like that, but again, you cut all that out. But you get into like, oh, this is great. You're looking at the Liverpool Echo and getting all these people saying, oh, this happened 10 years ago, and Celtic fans come in here and we're not having them. And you're sort of getting right into that, and then you go, I will need to trim this down eventually, but it's great fun. Filling up the bibliography is great. Find another book that's got a wee sliver of information is magic, but then let's say you look for podcasts and different things like that as well. You might get a wee snippet of somebody talking about something, and it's like you get that wee spark when you hear somebody mention something that follows on to from what you've written, but it's a process of building it up and then trimming it down again.
It's the problem, isn't it, with any kind of historical writing, anything that requires research, is you've got to get rid of a lot of that research, unfortunately, just because of space. I mean, some of the chapters I thought you could probably have written a book, like The Death of Jock Stein, for instance. You could probably have written a book on. You've got so many points of view and the people that were there and all those kind of things that,
Yeah, there was a couple of things that I said I want to make this longer to do this justice, like The Death of Jock Stein, and that inevitably means trimming other things and making other chapters shorter, so you can sort of save the words over for the odd sort of 4 or 5 chapters I wanted to make a bit bigger as well.
And in terms of getting it published, it's with Pitch, who did the previous book as well, is that right? Yeah. So were they, when you pitched this to them, were they like, we're happy to go with this?
Yeah, for this it was quite easy. What I did with the first book, basically I just started writing the first book myself without any book deal or any encouragement of anybody else. It was something I wanted to do, and I could probably have pitched it earlier than I did, because I was pretty much almost finished it by the time I went to Pitch's website and had a look at their guidelines for what they wanted from a pitch document, and I pitched it to another company as well, but I never ever heard back from them. But Pitch is the absolute right place for this type of book.
Sure.
So it was quite straightforward. I've done the pitch document in the way that they wanted, where a breakdown of chapters, what you were trying to do. They want to be sure you're trying to say something new. You're trying to have a different perspective on something if the story's already been told, if it's already out there, and you give them examples of other books that are in a similar fashion. And then when I sent that off a little while later, they asked me a couple of questions. I think I got an email just asking for just tell me this or tell me that, and I replied to that, and then they sent me a contract, which was simpler than I thought it was going to be. So towards the end of that process, I wrote another 2 pitches for them and said, what about either of these 2? And they come back and said, yeah, we'll do both of them,
Right.
And the Scotland book I said was going to take me longer than the other one, but they said let's get the Scotland book first. So I was like, okay, that's less time I've got. But obviously you say, I can do that.
Of course you do.
You don't go, you're like, no problems.
And in terms of word count, was that quite tight? Was it?
It was 90,000 words. I think I asked for like 101,000 words. It was like 1,000 words per chapter. And they'd agreed to that, and then come back to me later on and said, can we make it 90? So I'm like, okay. But yeah.
So because there's so much in the book, I thought it would be a nice idea to pick out some of the chapters to talk about so people can get a kind of idea of what's going on. And the best place to start is obviously chapter 1, Scotland 0, England 0, 1872.
Yeah, so Scotland start off with a no score draw. Yeah, Yeah, so that game, 1872, which is played at the cricket ground in Partick, at Hamilton Crescent. It's been covered a lot.
Yeah.
Obviously over the years, like Andy Mitchell, football historian's done a lot on it, you know. But that's the place to start, you know. It's interesting because it was essentially Queen's Park. Queen's Park couldn't have it at their ground at the time because their ground wasn't enclosed, so they couldn't charge admission for it.
Right.
So they had to find.
I wondered why it was at the cricket ground.
They had to find another location. So the cricket ground also had rugby on it as well. You know, it was a sports ground kind of thing. So that's why it was held there, because they could charge an admission fee, and it was a result of that the Queen's Park realised, when they saw the profit, which was £33, they realised that they had to get a ground that was enclosed that they could charge admission for. So which is where the first Hampden Park comes in. So yeah, it's 0-0 draw. There's no photograph. 1872. There's no photographs in the game. A photographer turned up. But when the players all refused to buy prints of him, he just went home again. So, but yeah, it was. I mean, it was kind of international rugby had been played before. Scotland and England had played international rugby, but this was the first time that there'd been a Scotland-England, proper Scotland-England game. There'd been this Scotland-England games before, but they were basically Scots who were based in England, and some of that were English people who owned land in Scotland, who saw themselves as Scots because of that. So, but this was the first it was Scottish people living in Scotland who played against an English team.
And you talk about Queen's Park realising that there was money to be made. So was nobody charging for crowds before that?
I couldn't tell you that to be honest. I think. Yeah, like I say, Queen's Park didn't have an enclosed ground, so they couldn't pay to have people come in, because it was just a sort of public ground. But I couldn't tell you for definite if that was the case at the time.
One of the reasons I wanted to bring that up was because I played a couple of games for the Scottish Writers team, and the first game I was involved in was Scotland-England at the cricket
games, really?
Yeah, it was great. It was covered. Radio 4 kind of covered it and did a half-hour programme on it. Which, but yeah, that was an interesting thing. A lot of ringers going on there, I think, as well.
Yeah.
But you were talking about Christopher Brookmeyer.
Yeah.
He was involved with it, as was, I think, Simon Weir was our goalkeeper.
Of course, yeah. Simon plays in goal. Yeah. When we had Christopher Brookmeyer on our podcast, I mean Simon and Andy Smith, we'd pulled up a photograph of him. It was a photograph of him doing like an spectacular overhead kick, and he said that actually, he says, I think that launched an England attack. He says, I kicked it so badly it went in the opposite direction. I think England were right up the park.
They're still going strong. The Writers team still play regularly. The next one I want to talk about was Chapter 3 and Andrew Watson. Yeah. Interesting character.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. Again, someone who the other people have done a lot of research on. Jed O'Brien has done a lot of research on him. There's been a couple of documentaries about Andrew Watson. It's the first black Scottish international. He was from. His father had money, so he was able to play football because he had a bit of money. His father's inheritance, so that sort of helped him. And he put money into teams he played with as well. You know, he only played 3 times for Scotland because he's moved down south, and at the time Scotland wouldn't pick players who didn't live in Scotland and play in Scotland. But yeah, he was a guy who was lost to Scottish history for a long time, until guys like Jed O'Brien done their research on him to bring him more to the fore kind of thing. You know, he only played 3 times, but he played in the famous international where Scotland beat England 5-1. There's the mural at Hampden Bowling Club that you can see from the train.
And there's another mural off from in Shawlands as well.
Okay.
Down a lane which I just passed one day. I went, who's that? But that's who it is.
Yeah.
The next one is, there's lots of stories I knew nothing about, obviously, but one of them was the SFA refused to accept Scotland's place in the 1950 World Cup.
Yeah.
So what's the story behind
It's
that?
it's remarkable. So FIFA wanted Scotland and England to go out and play in Brazil because they were trying to expand the game to the world. But so the British Championship at the time, which was the annual games between Scotland, England, Ireland, and Wales, so Northern Ireland and Wales. That was doubling up as a qualifier for the World Cup. So now obviously we've got European groups, but at the time the home international championship doubled up, and they said that the top two teams would qualify, but Scotland insisted that they would only qualify if they won the group, even although two places were allowed, and Scotland had finished second in the group. Early on, because the games were sort of played across the course of the season, but they'd won against Northern Ireland and Wales, so they'd already qualified quite early on, and FIFA had actually included Scotland in the list of qualified teams, but Scotland insisted that only if we beat England in that final game and won the group would we go, and England won 1-0, I think. And the Scottish FA still insisted that they wouldn't go. I think there was something in it because it was Brazil that they thought it was too far away and it was going to cost them. It was going to cost them money. Although George Graham, the head of the SFA, he still flew out himself to see what was going on. It was fine for him to go out to Brazil. But and the English FA, the English captain at the time, sort of insisted, Scotland, come on, like go. We'll grow the game, and in the book I say George Young, Scotland and Rangers, who was the captain at the time, he said it was one of the few things that he was that still rankled with him through his career. One of the few things he was left annoyed about after his career, that Scotland didn't go, because he felt everybody who went would have improved, would have learned as a player, and it would have developed the Scottish game. But the SFA were adamant that they were only. It was that attitude that we don't need to go. Like we created football.
We invented the game.
We don't need to go over there to show you how to play football. So there was that kind of attitude at the time. But yeah, it's remarkable that we qualified for that World Cup, but didn't go. And even when George Graham goes and he comes back, and he talks about it wasn't fair on the teams in Europe because they travel. At the time they took to travel there and acclimatise to the heat. South Americans were better placed. It shouldn't be played. It should be played somewhere where everybody's got an equal chance, kind of thing. But at that point, they were still kind of adamant. Well, we don't think we'll be going to 1954 either. They were still saying then, we don't think this is for us, But yeah, eventually, the attitude slowly changes. But again, it's these things through the years that the Scottish football, the bureaucracy, just sort of held the national team and development of football in Scotland back a little bit.
I was going to say the SFA don't necessarily come out very well at the book because of that conservatism that they seem to have, that kind of innate. That's something new, and we don't really want to try. Yeah,
there's. I mean, I think
full of characters that were that ilk.
Yeah, there is, and like every sort of new development kind of thing through the years, there is that kind of resistance. I mean, there was a resistance to floodlights, which is crazy to think of now that people are like, we don't play in the dark, we don't play under lights, it's things like that,
The next two I wanted to talk about were two of the greats coming to Scotland, coming to Glasgow in particular. First, in chapter 43, it's Pelé comes to Glasgow, and what an impact that would have been.
Yeah, so Pelé comes 1966 as Brazil are preparing to go to England for the World Cup to defend their World Cup, and it's played on a Saturday afternoon. The previous week, Portugal had played, and Eusebio had played with Portugal, but I think there was quite a low attendance for that one compared to Pelé coming to play for Brazil against Scotland. But Scotland score first. John Clark scores early on, and then Brazil equalised shortly afterwards. It finishes 1 each. But Billy Bremner goes out to mark goes out to Mark Pelly, and the two of them have quite a battle. And Billy Bremner says in one of his autobiographies, he's thinking this talented, this player. He's, I'm just going to bang clatter him and he'll go down, and he goes into him and bounces off him. And says Pelly's solid.
Yeah.
He realises. He says he's used to mixing it with guys in the English league, and he knows right away they don't fancy it, but right away he goes into Pelly and he's like, oh no, he's up for this, and they find out that Pelly's actually a much tougher, he's obviously kicked all his career, so they find he finds he's a much tougher character, and the game is a bit of a battle. It's not, and you find that with Brazil through the years. You just think the samba, the skills and all that, but you find Brazil are actually quite a tough team all through the years, sort of quite hard tackling and quite can be quite dirty as well. There'll be elbows.
There'll be dark arts.
You find that you just think they're all silky and skillful, but that's not quite the case. But it's a memorable occasion because obviously Pelé was a great. Even then he was seen as the greatest player in the world. And he was that reputation as greatest player that played the game. And he comes to Scotland and he doesn't particularly set the day alight, probably because that Scotland are right on top of him, and Bremner's getting in hard on him, and there's a few wee tussles all over the pitch that day. So he perhaps it's not a memorable game in the sense that he brought his skills, but and then obviously Brazil don't do too well in England later that summer. And
the person who arguably took over that mantle of the greatest player, Maradona, comes to Glasgow, and I think he did turn it on.
He absolutely did. Yeah, that was kind of the real kind of what's the making of Maradona, but that was when he really came at the fore. To be fair, he says it in one of his books as well. He scores that day, and he feels that's him. He's starting to become an international player at that point. He played in Ireland. Just before that, Argentina, which I don't think was actually the Republic of Ireland team. I think it was like a Shamrock Rovers team that was in Ireland 11. But he played over there and turned it on over there. And then he comes to Scotland, and he just he does absolutely turn it on that day. Every Scottish player you'll see said, like Alan Hansen at the time. He'd been at Liverpool, won the European Cups, was playing in this great defence, and Hansen said, Phil Thompson has shown him this wee way to defend. You take a couple of steps back before lunging in. He said he tried that with Maradona, and he'd take his 2 steps back. Maradona was past him before he was ready to put his tackle in. And everybody says that he absolutely couldn't get near him that day. And the Scottish fans, because my brother was at the game as well, and he tells me this, they remember the Scottish fans singing Argentina. So it's a friendly, so there's nothing at stake, and it's a glorious summer's day, and it's the Hampden Terraces in the era where you could bring drink in. So everybody's obviously having a great day, and they're watching this fantastic young player. I think Argentina had won the World Youth Cup. So he was known, but he wasn't in the 78 World Cup winning team.
Right, yeah.
But he was known as a sort of young. Well, Archie McPherson says that he's just this name in a team sheet at the time, and he doesn't expect him to actually dominate the game the way he does, But that sort of really sets him off. As this kind of name player to watch, and he says he loved it because the Scotland fans started cheering for him and cheering for Argentina towards the end, which and obviously Scotland fans later on, for a different reason, have a great affection for Maradona a few years later in the '86 World Cup, but this is where it comes from, that he does come here and he lights the game up. And like I say, every Scotland player who played against him, I'll say greatest player ever played against, never get near him that day. But yeah.
And that would have been a strong Scottish team as well. These were good players at that time to be able to say that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you guys like Hansen and John Wark, and guys who could do it in the European stage and had already played against big names in Europe, and like I say, Hansen had won a European Cup at the time.
So the next one is Scotland win the European Under-18 Championship, which again there's been quite a lot recently. I know Pat Nevin did a TV programme about it, but some people might not know about it. Winning a European Under-18 Championship.
And Finland in 1982, just ahead of the Spain World Cup, Scotland go out and win the European youth tournament, where they beat Holland along the way with Marco van Basten, and the team. They beat the Czechoslovakia as it was then in the final. But yeah, you've got guys like Pat Nevins, kind of the star of the team, and like you say, there was that documentary about it recently, because the footage, despite the fact, again, it's like nowadays games like that would be on live, but then it was just, it was a wee snippet in the Daily Record. Scotland win 2-0 in the semi-final or whatever, Then once we get to the final, it becomes slightly bigger news, But Andy Roxburgh's in charge of the team, and it's the only sort of big tournament like that a Scottish team's won, and it's a kind of,
and players who would go on to have good careers as well. A lot of them, anyway.
Guys like Gary Mackay and Dave Bowman's in that team as well. Brian Rice that played for Hibs and Nottingham Forest. And obviously like Pat Nevin.
And Ali Dick, was in it, wasn't he? And what a player he was, he didn't quite maybe fulfil the potential that they thought he had. But
So again, like Ali Dick and Paul McStay, and also Ali Dick and Paul McStay had played in that 1980 schoolboys game against England, where Scotland won 5-4. It was Ali Dick is on to play for Tottenham and Ajax, but his career's kind of stalled through injury. And Paul McStay, of course, is part of that team as well.
And next, something I remember, people talk about JFK moments. This was a bit of one for me, because when the death of Jock Stein, I can remember being at school that day in the morning, and folk were betting amongst each other who's going to score and all that kind of stuff. And one of my pals found out Davy Cooper was going to be playing, so he said, "I'm changing my bet. I'm going to put money on Cooper." But it was a huge game, and then this huge tragedy at the end of it.
Yeah.
So this was 1985.
So 1985. So Scotland go into that game against Wales, needing a point to qualify for a playoff. For the World Cup finals in '86. Well, that's the thing. Actually, you say that. So the playoff was against Australia, but it was very much, as I recall, seen as a sort of fait accompli. It's just Australia. It was almost like that was us through. Like nowadays, we would be like, "God, Australia need to go and play Australia." But it was almost just seen as that's us just about qualified, because it's just Australia we need to beat now, home and away. So it's unusual now to think back at that. It just felt like that was the job pretty much done. So Scotland needed a point. It was played at Ninian Park in Cardiff. And if you watch the game now, it's on YouTube now. This is one of the things I had to buy on DVD at the time I was writing it. It's been put on YouTube now. The game, it's a small ground, but you can sense, when you watch the game, you can sense the atmosphere. It's a big match. Played at a club ground. It's a big match, loads of big flags, in the crowd and all that, and it's a real crackling atmosphere. And just as a side note, there's something that happens at half time. When the substitution's made, Jim Leighton comes off at half time and Alan Ruff goes on. There's just a wee thing I noticed when I was watching it. The commentators, I think Ian St John's, one of the co-commentators, they look about and they go, "There's no changes," and then the director shows them Alan Ruff's come on, and they go, "Oh, Alan Ruff's come on." It seemed like it was the sort of last time where the TV people were told, "Well, we're having a football match and you can come and be there, but you're just there. This is a football match and you're just there.
You're not in charge."
Exactly. Whereas nowadays, they would know first. They'd probably know before the player was coming on that he was coming on. They would have the information first, because it's TV people are filming a football match, but then it just felt like it was a football match that TV people were allowed to be at. That's just a wee side note. But yeah, I remember that game as well, and obviously Wales score, Wales score in the first half. Mark Hughes scores for Wales, and then the second half, Davy Cooper's come on as a substitute. We get what's seen as a dubious penalty, probably be given now. Phillips' arms are up in the air. The ball's going over the stand, but that's sort of irrelevant where the ball's going. Anyway, it's penalty kick, and Davy Cooper steps up and scores, and that's we get the 1-1 draw. But Jock Stein takes ill at the end and dies shortly afterwards. So much has been written about that, about Jock Stein's death. There's been so many articles every sort of 5 years or 10 years or whatever. There's another article on it. So I felt I wanted to do something a little bit different. Same as I did for the 1967 Scotland-England game as well. There's a lot been written about that, and obviously there's a new book out by Michael McHugh Gallis specifically about that 67 game between Scotland and England. So I felt I wanted to do something different with that game and in this 1985 game with the death of Jock Stein. So I sort of waded through every article I could find on it from the time and from retrospective articles and every autobiography, and I wrote it as an oral history. Because I'm a big fan of oral histories. It's not something that's done so much with British football. Usually find like TV, American TV and film every now and again, like Vulture or something, I'll have an oral history of a TV series, or there's a great book on Die Hard. There's an oral history of Die Hard, you know. So I love all those sort of oral histories where it's told in the moment by people who were there, kind of thing, and there's a little bit of prose that needs to link for the next one bit to the next bit. So so that's what I did. I waded through interviews and retrospective accounts and autobiographies, and I pulled first-hand accounts of the people who were there and tried to tell the stories of that day chronologically through everybody who was there, and hopefully I've succeeded in making it a sort of a different, you know, a different perspective to what's been written about the death of Jock Stein.
Because you have all these the people that were there, as you say, and that's what makes it really interesting reading for me, because certainly with the players to be that close and to have gone from elation, as you say, they think, well, we've done it, you know, and to this kind of depths of despondency. And that's what they all say, because the sort of job's done, but they find, you know, they get told just stay in the park for as long as you can, because that's what Jock Stein's been taken into the medical room, and then eventually they go into the dressing room and they say they're all just numb. They go from, you know, celebrating the greatest moment of their career kind of thing to just everybody's just quiet as they wait to find out what's happening, and then they hear that Jock Stein's died, and it's just all. And I find some of the Welsh players as well say that they are all complaining about the penalty kick, and they're all raging that they've lost this game and they're out of the World Cup, and then they hear that Jock Stein's died, and then they stop complaining and moaning, because they realise, oh, this is a big tragedy that's happened here. I found lots of different accounts, and one I found was from Mike Peters of The Alarm as well. So The Alarm were at that game with a journalist from Record Mirror. Had Wales got the qualification spot, The Alarm were going to do the official World Cup song for Wales, so they were there obviously hoping that Wales went in, and Mike Peters told this story about how he went in to the bar or whatever afterwards, because news travelled slowly in those days. It was the word of mouth, and Joe Jordan, who was co-commentating for somebody, came into the bar as well, and he went up to Joe Jordan to have a go at him for handling the ball in the 1977 game, and he says Joe Jordan just grabs him by the throat, and he says, he must have known about Jock Stein. I don't know if he did. That might just have been Joe Jordan's reaction to somebody coming up and saying to him, you handled the ball in that game. But yeah, and it's but you get all these accounts of people, sort of grown men crying, and journalists crying, and the players, and the fans, because obviously the fans just went from a high to a low, and guys that were travelling back from Cardiff to Fort William in the bus, you know what I mean? They were just devastated, sort of carry-outs going on drunk on the way up the roads, because everybody was just devastated. The loss of Jock Stein at the time, because he was seen Scotland's greatest ever manager, certainly at that time, because it was less than 20 years since Celtic had won the European Cup, so he was held in such high esteem, and for his death to happen so suddenly and on such an occasion, it was absolutely shattering for people in Scottish football, And let's say the game itself was interesting. That where Jim Leighton had lost a contact lens. I was thinking, why did Rough come on? But it was the loss of a contact lens.
Jim Leighton loses a contact lens, and when you watch the game now and you know that that's happened, there's a moment where the ball comes down. It's an easy ball. It comes to catch, and he completely misses it, and it comes down to his feet. And you understand now why that's happened, because he's seen two balls and he doesn't know where to go. You know what I mean? And so he comes off at half time, and he has to say he's lost his contact lens. But Alex Ferguson, who's the assistant manager of Scotland, Leighton's manager at club level with Aberdeen, he had no idea that he wore contact lenses. So, and Fergie, famously, the Fergie hairdryer, he's absolutely furious with him. So he's shouting at Jim Leighton in the dressing room over this with contact lenses, and he doesn't have a spare pair either, you know. And so they've got to get Alan Rough. They've got to bring Alan Rough back from kicking the ball about on the pitch to come back in, you know. And Ruff famously says that the last words Jock Stein said to him was, right, you're on, you fat bastard.
So what you mentioned there about how the relationship between football and television was maybe starting to change, and I wanted to talk about Chapter 70, which is about Only an Excuse, which of course was a theatre show first of all, and was kind of based on you mentioned Hugh McIlvanney as well. Hugh McIlvanney, Only a Game, is that right?
So it was William McIlvanney wrote and narrated Only a Game.
You narrated it, but did Hugh not?
Hugh was a contributor to it. So that was like April '86. I think Only a Game was on, and Only an Excuse as a sort of gentle mockery of that.
Some of the homage, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's love behind it.
They say that it was the flowery language that William McIlvanney used to talk about the Scottish game. And they did it as a Radio Scotland, as a one-off Radio Scotland show just ahead of the 1986 World Cup. And obviously it grew and grew because there was nothing else like that really at the time. I remember having it on cassette, taking it off the radio and having it on cassette, you know. And there was nothing else like it at the time, and obviously everybody who was into Scottish football just immediately sort of were drawn to it. This sort of half hour of comedy was just about football and about footballers we knew and impressions. And it was Jonathan Watson and Tony Roper at first, and Philip Differ was the man behind it, you know. And like you say, it grew and grew, and it started at the Clyde Theatre in Clydebank. I don't know if you remember the Clyde the theatre in Clydebank that was like Wildcat, it was like Dave Anderson ran it. So they done shows there, and then it gets bigger, goes to the Sits, and then it becomes just a fixture on Scottish television. And Jonathan Watson's obviously been a constant from it. And again, whether people say it's tired, and it's retired a few years ago, you know, but people would say but everyone watched it. There was always something in it that was that sort of summed up some element of Scottish football. There was always a bit somebody loved. Frank McAvenny, basically, his reputation sort of enhanced by this this impression that Jonathan Watson's done of him over the years. And again, it's a fixture, and it's where a lot of people know characters of Scottish football. I mean, Jonathan Watson said that Frank McAvenny, you don't need to know Scottish football to find that character funny, to enjoy that character, you know. So again, it comes from a love of Scottish football, and again, that taking the mickey out ourselves, so as
I did
well.
the theatre show on VHS. It's one of the few VHS I still have, even though I don't have a player anymore. But where was that recorded? Would that be the Sits? Or
the Sits, and I think they play the Kings. I think they were at the
because it's got players in the audience as well that they refer to him.
Well, this is the thing. People loved being sent up as well, and things like that. So it keeps them in the public eye, and it was always done with affection, I mean, it was never a takedown of anyone, It was always done. It was always done with affection,
But it's amazing how the reputations of certain people, that's the reputation on Only an Excuse kind of it took over what maybe the reality was. Chick Young and people such Jim White, people like that,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's sort of the caricature becomes what people think.
I can vaguely remember a Radio Clyde advert. It would have been, and it was Derek Johnson and Chick Young, and Chick Young was basically doing Chick Young. It wasn't himself; he was doing Johnny Watson doing Chick Young. So the next one I want to talk about is Andy Roxburgh, because here's a guy who was different as a manager to what had gone previously and perhaps what has gone subsequently as well.
Yeah, so Andy Roxburgh, at the time he was appointed, what was he, 42, he'd never managed a club side, and he was a guy that a lot of the press kind of were going, who was the headlines, why is this guy get the... I think sort of Billy McNeil was kind of the front runner at the time. He was the guy that the press were kind of saying, you know, because he was a big name kind of thing, you know. But Andy Roxburgh had been working for the SFA since the early 1970s. So Andy Roxburgh was a player in his day. He was a forward, played with Partick Thistle, Falkirk, played with Clydebank, because I'm a Clydebank supporter, so he played He played with Clydebank, and he coached Clydebank, and he coached Davy Cooper. In his early days, Cooper was a youngster coming through at Clydebank, and he tried to get him to use his right foot as opposed to he's used his left all the time. So they kept trying to coach him to use his right foot, and they put him on he played a lot of his early... I'm digressing a bit here, but Davy Cooper played a lot of his early games with Clydebank on the right wing because he tried to get him to use his right foot, but he just cut inside with his left, which Andy Roxburgh says was unusual at the time. Says Messi did that many years later, and that's
Robin, I can think of
commonplace kind of thing. He says, but that was different at the time, you know. So he was a coach at Clydebank, and his uncles were in charge of Clydebank, Jack Steedman and Charles Steedman, and Jack Steedman went on to be involved with the Scottish League. He was the president of the Scottish League, but he left Clydebank to become the Scott SFA's development director or whatever it was. I can't remember the exact title he had. So he was working with the youth. He was working with all the youth teams. You know, let I talk a wee bit about the '76 youth team that won a tournament in Cannes. He was in charge of that, and like we were saying earlier, for the '82. So he'd coached a lot of the youngsters, and he'd been involved, and the high Hegians at the SFA had all liked Roxburgh, and he was very well respected, and he was actually the papers actually quoted him when Ali MacLeod left. He was one of the sort of outsiders for him and Craig Brown were two of the outsiders for the Scotland job at 20 to 1 or whatever, you know. So he was known at the time. He'd never managed at club level, but he'd obviously coached all through the youth ranks, and he was kind of groomed for taking over the international job, you know. And so it comes in with that kind of who is this guy? Yeah. Why is it not a big club manager that's getting this job? Because obviously the Scotland job at that time is seen as, especially with Steen having it, it's seen as the pinnacle. Yeah. That's what you do once you've achieved at club level. You go and manage your country. You know, I think certainly that was how it was. The England job was seen as well. That's the pinnacle. You can win the European Cup, but the pinnacle is managing your... I think these days it's just seen as a good...
changed.
Seen as just as another good job kind of thing, you know. The Scotland job, you're not necessarily looking for the guy that won the Champions League or whatever to manage Scotland, but so anyway, he comes in and he actually does quite well. Sometimes he has problems with players with the respect. You know, Richard Gough seemed to have an issue with him over the years, you know, and Gough's autobiography, there's pretty much a takedown of Andy Roxburgh and Richard Gough's autobiography, where he'll talk about, you know, he's no like the previous managers that I've had, you know what I mean. He's no like the other guys kind of. So he did occasionally have this sort of respect issue with guys because he'd never been a successful player, or you know, he'd never managed at club level, you know. But he becomes quite popular, I think, with the fans, you know, and he had quite a good relationship with the Scotland fans, and he actually achieved quite well. I mean, you look back at his career and Craig Brown's career as well, they actually achieved quite a lot, but at the time it was expected that we were going to qualify for tournaments, you know. Yeah. So we were kind of annoyed when we didn't qualify for tournaments. Like now we're delighted when we do, but in those days we were annoyed when we didn't, you know. But but obviously he did have respect to guys like Paul McStay, for the most people, certainly the younger guys who grew,
who would have been with him all the way through.
Yeah,
I played Glasgow schools under 15, and we were taken down to Largs, which is a kind of SFA base, for 3 days training. It was absolutely brilliant. 3 days of football, we couldn't beat it. But Roxburgh took it, and then there was Jim Fleeting, and then there was, I'm going to say, Willie McLean.
Yeah.
So, so he had this team of folk who were still doing that, even though, he was dealing with older people now, looking after the youngsters coming through and keeping an eye on all these kind of, youngsters coming through.
Yeah.
And it was some setup. I mean, it was probably quite forward thinking for the time. Lots of video analysis. This is for kids. Video analysis. Lots of different training techniques and all that. It wasn't just here's a ball going.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And again, at Clydebank, Roxburgh, and I speak about in the book as well, Dr. Stuart Hillis as well, we're quite forward thinking. Clydebank did video analysis in the 70s. Again, I'm digressing here, but Ricky Agnew, who was on the board at Clydebank, if you remember Agnew Stores,
yes, I do.
He bought a video camera and they filmed games, and they filmed matches, and then they would watch it afterwards. However, one of the players who was out injured did commentary on it, and apparently the commentary was just so funny that they stopped analysing the performances, and they would just laugh at
the end of year kind of turn
at the commentary, So Roxburgh and let's say Dr. Stuart Hillis was they were sort of forerunners at things like that. I mean, Clydebank had your players on exercise bike hooked up to heart monitors and stuff like that
in the 70s.
Aye, but it seemed like this is a wacky idea, and
at a time when Rangers were still running up and down the sands.
Gillian Sands, yeah. But so Clydebank they did things like that, which nowadays is absolute standard. All this kind of watch how far they run, and they're watching for their heart rate and all this, they're resting and all this kind of stuff. But Clydebank and let's say guys like Andy Roxburgh and Stuart Hillis were doing that back in the 70s when it was seen as maybe a bit crackpot. So like you're saying, it didn't surprise me they were doing that kind of video analysis for youngsters, and I guess watching what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong and how to improve.
One-to-one sessions and all that stuff. I should say before we move on, Roxburgh went on to be a kind of high headman involved with FIFA, and in world football. Yeah.
I think the last time he was out in Malaysia, working out there. But he worked. He done
well respected.
Yeah, he would do sort of go to World Cups to do sort of reports on it for FIFA. Yeah, he's absolutely well respected in international circles. Yeah.
So the next chapter I wanted to talk about was the Under-16 World Championship final. Again, by this point I was getting into pubs. In fact, I may even have been working. What year was that?
89?
Yeah, I was working in restaurants in Glasgow, and we managed to get away on our break to watch this final where they were playing the Saudis.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia in the final.
The boys of the Saudi Arabians, as it was known.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about that final, because it was something rather special, and I'd forgotten it was a World Championship final.
Yeah, it was a World Cup final. I think it was the third one of that level. Yeah, so the tournament had built. They done sort of double headers. They done double header games, and the attendances had built slowly. But there was TV coverage of it, and the weather was good that summer as well. So the attendances started to grow, and Scotland were doing better and better. The semi-final was against Portugal at Tynecastle. And Luis Figo was part of the Portugal team, and there was about 5,000 locked out at that game at Tynecastle for the semi-final, and Scotland won, I think 1-0. It was Brian O'Neill that scored. So we go to the final. It's at Hampden Park on a Saturday afternoon. It's on live, and I watched it live on
3 o'clock kickoff
BBC. Yeah, it was 50,000 or whatever. It was in again the days when Hampden was terracing, and Scotland. If I'm right, Scotland were 2-0 up, and I think we missed a penalty kick somewhere along the way as well, and Saudi Arabia pulled it back to 2 each, and they beat us on penalty kicks, and then obviously after the Saudi Arabians looked much older, and certainly Ernie Walker of the SFA is adamant that they were older than 16. They were guys in their 20s, and he said he was told by a coach, he's absolutely adamant that Scotland were done at that. And it wasn't just Scotland. It wasn't Scotland after the fact. Other managers that played them through the tournament complained and said these guys aren't 16. These guys are definitely older. Other managers put complaints in through the tournament that just sort of get ignored, or they get shown passports or whatever, birth certificates or whatever. It's like, no, they're not, but
it's interesting if that was right, because I played a bit of handball at the time, and we played a Saudi Arabian team in a tournament in Sweden, and they were like that. It's supposed to be an under 17s tournament, I think, and they all did the beards and everything. So it may just be that you're growing a beard early.
Yeah, possibly, yeah. But it's not just Scottish sour grapes. I think when you look at it, like I say, other managers did complain about it at the time, but like you say, they maybe looked older or whatever. But yeah, it'll always be that they were the under 16 team, but we'll always complain that no, we were beaten by like 20 year olds.
Paul Dickoff, who looked about 12.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
The next one I want to talk about, chapter 84, is Julie Fleeting. Her stats alone: 121 caps, 116 goals. What a striker! What a career, really. Yeah,
absolutely. And her career sort of goes through the development of the women's game. It's when she starts her career, it's sort of a hobby. And by the time she ends, it's become sort of professional sport. Yeah. She played out in America, because at the time that was really where only place you could really play professional football if you were a woman. I wanted to touch on the women's game, because there's 3 chapters that focus on the women's game, because obviously it's became much bigger over the years, and it's now seen pretty much on par with the men, or certainly the SFA do try to show it as on par with the men's game, whereas before obviously it was banned, and the SFA wouldn't touch it for a long time, and I'd done a chapter on Edna Nellis as well. I think Rose Riley's quite well known now. I mean, she has eventually got her dues in recent years, but for a long time the women's game hadn't, and I think Edna Nellis was a contemporary of Rose Riley's, who again there's been a little bit about, but again it's one of those players that didn't really kind of get her due at the time. But yeah, Julie Fleeting comes in, but one of the games I'm talking about, Scotland were playing at Scotstoun Stadium. That was the home game for Scotland. But as she goes through her career, there's let's say the professional game changes. So she sort of goes through it all. Like I say, from as if it was a hobby for ladies to actually becoming a serious sport, where that crowds are encouraged to come and see. They're actually getting thousands.
And to have that record in a team, because she was the standout player, undoubtedly for Scotland at that time, to have that record in a team that didn't match her, it's quite something.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's like you say, it's not a team that's strong all the way through it. You've got somebody who's effectively a sort of superstar for the women's game at that time, being part of the Scotland team at the time. Yeah, but obviously our dad was a Jim.
He worked with Andy Roxburgh. Right. Yeah. Involved with Kilmarnock. And so he knew his stuff. He was a coach as well as a player himself.
Yeah, but again, it's people like Julie Fleeting again have set the groundwork for the game the way it is now. And nowadays, girls growing up can see football as a professional sport. It's not a hobby. You can actually make a decent living of it. So girls. I mean, I've got a friend who's both his son and his daughter are goalkeepers, and both trying to make their way in professional sport. And they both played for a variety of different clubs. You know what I mean? But his daughter seen his son doing it, and she went, I want to do that. And it is a path, and you might even say she's maybe got a better chance of becoming a professional than he has, kind of thing. If you
don't sheer numbers.
Exactly. But it is absolutely a path now, and it's people like Julie Fleeting that have made it so.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last chapter I wanted to look at brings it almost up to date, because it's chapter 99. Serbia won, Scotland won 5-4 on penalties in 2020. And I just wanted to mention this because it seems to me that was the game where people started to believe in the current Scotland team and went, we've got a chance of doing better than we have been, because it's pretty grim up till this point, really. And then
you're absolutely right. Yeah, because we get to this playoff as a semi-final against Israel, played behind closed doors because it gets moved for the COVID pandemic. I actually had a ticket for it, and then it was, I think it was originally the Israel game was March, and then it gets bumped because of COVID. Plays behind closed doors, and we qualify on penalty kicks. But yeah, that Serbia game felt like one of the biggest games in a generation for Scotland, because you did feel that we had a chance. Wasn't like with playoffs against England where you're like, are we, maybe going to be too strong for us or whatever. But it did feel that we had a chance. And again, it was a game played behind closed doors. It was on live television, so everybody here was watching it on television at this time. And we played great, took the lead, and then lost a last minute equaliser. But like you say, we still had that kind of, it wasn't a kind of heads down, that's our chance gone. There was still a kind of like, no, we can still do this, And again, of course, we win in penalty kicks. Scored 5 again. Scored all 5 against Israel. Scored all 5 against Serbia. And it's a battling performance, and we get through, and like you say, there's a lot of emotional interviews at the end. Ryan Christie breaks down in tears, and that's all over social media. And the Yes Sir I Can Boogie was born as a Scottish anthem that night as well, and like you say, we've qualified for a tournament, and we don't feel we've qualified through the back door. We've worked for it, and we feel we're good enough, and you can start to name players that are going to do it for us. You've got Andy Robertson and McGinn and Christie, and there's more and more players in it nowadays.
What I think you kind of had the feeling that if you could get through this game, there's a group, a generation, if you like, coming through that are going to be better than what's gone before, but you have to get through these stages to give them that stage.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and obviously Scott McTominay's really became a big player for Scotland as well in recent years, and it's not just one or two guys now. You're seeing there's lots of players now that are actually delivering and doing well at club level and doing well in England. Like McGinn's becoming like one of the biggest players in England. Wouldn't surprise me if he was getting a 50 million transfer to a bigger club by the season's end. So a lot of these guys are actually like we used to do. They're the engine room of their club side. Because obviously we used to have back in the 80s, every English team had 3 Scots. You had Hanson, Souness, Dalglish. You had Burley, Wark, Brazil, Ipswich. There was always Jordan, Macari, McQueen at Manchester United. Every sort of big English team had Scots in it. But now it's starting to happen again. You're seeing Scottish players like Andy Robertson and let's say John McGinn and Scott McTominay are starting to become a central part of their team.
Players going overseas and doing well as well.
Yeah, well, this is the thing as well. You've got guys that are out in Italy, and different other countries as well, who are also becoming a big central part of their team. So it is a great time again to be a Scotland fan, and you hope that we can kick on, and it gives a belief as well that we can sort of build for generations, and hopefully now we're going to qualify for the next round. That's the thing, is to get into the knockout round at a tournament for the first time ever. Unbelievable that Scotland still haven't managed to do that with all the quality we've got, and you look at going back, it's maybe the 60s. We should have done maybe better in the 60s, because you had guys like Jim Baxter and Dennis Law and Jimmy Johnson and Billy McNeil and John Gregg, with so many guys again who were central to their teams, who were big in Europe, and we didn't manage to do anything in the 60s with guys like that, But hopefully now, going forward, that we are going to start to qualify regularly for tournaments again. We're going to start to qualify for knockout rounds, and we're going to start to beat England on a regular basis. We still kind of beat England whenever we play them, but hopefully that's coming as well.
To be fair, they've not got a bad team at the moment as well.
Yeah, true, but hopefully that's coming.
So I was going to ask you about the future of the team. We've got a tournament. We're going to a tournament again. 2 tournaments in a row. We've got the possibility of others coming up. It looks bright.
Yeah, no, absolutely it does. Yeah, and I think there's hope all over. The fans are all hopeful. There's not any doom and gloom amongst the fan base. You know, the fans are going over to Germany in numbers. Everybody's hopeful that we're going to get through. We're going to get through the group, and then who knows from there where we can go. We've seen other nations do it. We've seen other smaller nations do it.
Yeah.
Get from. And Croatia got to a World Cup final, so we've seen other nations do it. So why not?
Yeah, no.
Why not Scotland?
Absolutely. And what's next for you now this book is out? And you mentioned another one. I don't know. If
I'm currently writing. This is my day off this week from writing the next book. So the next book is hopefully going to be out at the end of May. So the next book is called Going to the Wire, and it's English football. It's 12 English teams that survived relegation on the last day of the season. So I'm looking at Tottenham Hotspur in 75, right. Coventry in 85, Burnley in 87, going right up to Derby County in 2021. And this one, I'm interviewing people. I'm trying to get a hold of people, either players or historians or fans, that. So I've spoken to a variety of people from each club, different fans and different players, kind of thing. And I'm having fun with that. I'm quite liking going down the wee rabbit holes. Mm-hmm. I've been reading a lot of John Higgs. If you're aware of John Higgs' stuff, mm-hmm. He wrote a brilliant book on the KLF.
Yes.
And what's good about that is it's not just about the KLF. It goes away off onto different things that the KLF were sort of involved in or inspired by, and that's kind of what I've been doing with this. I've been looking at different wee things that crop up. For example, the thing I discovered the other day there, I've done a chapter in Barnsley, and I spoke to Ian McMillan, the poet,
right, yes.
And he talked about Kes in Barnsley. So I've been off and looked at Kes and done a wee bit of Kes, and I discovered that Barry Hines, who wrote Kestrel for a Knave, that the novel that the film is based on, he was a talented footballer, right. And he actually played for England schools against Scotland schools in at Celtic Park in the same game that Jock Stein spotted Billy McNeil.
Right.
So there's wee things like that. I'm like, that's a crazy a wee fact I can pull in. So this is about English football. It's about 12 teams that survive relegation.
And they survive relegation.
Yeah, well,
there's a lot of the teams eventually that you mentioned. They do eventually.
They do. Well, that's the thing. At the end, I've got a wee kind of like, did they get relegated? Yeah. And most of them, it's yes, they've been doing the next season, kind of thing, But it's good speaking to players and all that, because they're happy to talk about the game that they survived relegation. They survived relegation in, and talking to. Yeah,
because I was noticing at the FA Cup games at the weekend, Coventry won 6-2, and it made me think, when I was young, Coventry were always in the top division.
Yeah.
For a long, long time, and then it just shows you once you're out.
Yeah, that's true. They stayed till 2001. They've been down under Gordon Strachan, but they did a few close calls over the years. But they Luton beat them in the playoff last year for going up. Well, before we close, I need to ask you the story about your Premier League medal that's hanging up in here.
So I'm a Liverpool fan. That's my kind of central team. Starting, I was 7 when Dalglish went to Liverpool, and kind of that thing about following a player rather than a team. And coming from originally from Cambuslang in Glasgow, my parents were so delighted that it wasn't one of the old firm that they just bought me the mug and they bought me the scarf and they did that kind of thing. Anyway, a pal of mine, I don't know where he got it, but he managed to get me a Premier League winners medal from when Liverpool won it. Yes, it's I won't ask any questions about it. I'm sure it's just a copy. And before we do move on, we were talking. You mentioned the Shoot the Breeze podcast. Is that still ongoing?
It's
and what is it? So for people who don't know.
So the Shoot the Breeze podcast I do with my friends Andy Smith, who's on Twitter or X as Scots Footy Cards, and Simon Weir. Simon's an actor, and he also runs the Zico clothing store up at the Barras. So Andy's got about 12,000 old football magazines, goal, shoot, match, and the idea was that we get a guest on and give them an old football magazine, and we talk through the football magazine, and we've had lots of great guests. footballers and football managers, writers, playwrights. You know, we've had Christopher Brookmeyer on, Mark Billingham, Alan Bissett. We've had players like Andy McLaren, Jackie McNamara. We'd Craig Brown, the former Scotland manager, on. We'd musicians like Mark Gardner from Ride, Graham Lambert from Spiral Carpets. It's been mothballed for a while. Last one we did was just over a year ago. We're hopeful we can get it back. We can get it back going again. Yeah. But like I was saying to you, we used to do it in a studio, and last one we did was just before COVID with Andy Cameron. But then we started doing it via Zoom. But it would be great to get it back again, because I just like having. I don't bother about how many downloads we've got. Yeah. I just like the conversation. I just like being able to talk to somebody, especially when you, like I was saying to you off mic, getting somebody like Mark Gardner from Ride. Been a fan of his band since I was a teenager, you know. So sitting, being able to talk just to a guy like that about, like, you know, talking to the record covers, you know what I mean, the Ride's record covers, you know. It's you know what I mean. How else could you phone somebody up and go, I'm a fan, can we talk for 2 hours? I don't
think so, but you've got a mic, then
you've got a wee excuse, and there's a wee in there to have a chat. So I just enjoy chatting to people that you admire, you know what I mean. You read a book with somebody and you can go and try and find and get them on, like obviously like we're saying that you do here, you know. I mean, you read a book and you go, well, I'm really a fan of this writer, and you get them on.
Yeah, exactly.
To have a chat with them. And like I said to you before, your conversation with Denise Minor was fantastic. I learned so many things listening to her. Yeah. Her interview with you, you know, so it must be great getting these people.
You're absolutely right. You get to, you know, because you've got a certain platform, you do get to talk to people that, you know, you would never otherwise get the chance to do it.
Yeah.
You know, we were talking about Woody Allen films earlier. It's like that bit in Annie Hall where he pulls in
Marshall McLuhan, yeah.
It's like I have them right here. I love that aspect of it. Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to talk.
No, not at all. Thanks very much for having me.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different. Cheers.